there, I'm Elizabeth, and here's my teaching submission. So I'm going to kind of kick it off as if we've discussed a little bit in detail the larger kind of flow of user experience design, being discovery and empathy into defining, into ideating, prototyping, and testing. So right now what I'm going to talk about is what makes UX so different from other types of design, and why it's so valuable. And a lot of that has to do with what happens at the beginning of the process. So like we talked about earlier, UX, the process of UX and creating great user experiences needs to start off with this empathy stage. So at this point in the stage, we're really getting to know our users. It's super important to get out in the field, to talk to people, to observe, to conduct tasks with people, to really understand what the problem is like in their shoes. Obviously, let's say we are designing a software to make nurses' jobs easier in the hospital, make it easier for them to trade off in between shifts. None of us are nurses, and so it's really important that we spend time in that context, in that environment, to really get to know the problem from the perspective of the actual end user. And so that's what's going to happen in this research phase. Once we have our research, and we collect research in a lot of different ways, right? So I kind of covered some of them. We do it by basic observation, and a lot of this probably sounds really similar to your to maybe your like high school science class or middle school science class even, where and really the process in general almost probably does, because it's this kind of iterative process where you enter the situation with a hypothesis, and the whole time you're going through here you're really trying to validate or invalidate that hypothesis. The main difference is that you're not doing it for which bubblegum flavor lasts longer, or which light bulb grows plants the strongest, or whatever it is you did in third grade. What we're doing here is we're designing products that make people's lives better. And before we get started, this, and we've talked about this before, this process is applicable to any type of product, any type of experience. I've used this in a range of roles. I've used this in marketing, and I've used it in product design, and I've used it for on-screen and digital interfaces, and I've also used it to solve more social impact, real-world challenges. So it's a really flexible and stretchy process that you can really apply to a lot of different problems to kind of test and find solutions. So anyways, with that aside, when we're here in this research phase, and I kind of bucketed these two items together, and what we talked about is following this design thinking method. So user experience, like any other profession, there's a lot of ways of doing it, approaching it. A lot of people think that their way is right. Design thinking is a process that I use, and a slight variation of it. Every designer kind of hones in their own process. But what I love about design thinking is that it really emphasizes getting to know your user. And so this empathize phase, where we're conducting research, where we're collecting insights, that is really what separates design thinking in terms of its love of user first. So when we're here in the research phase, okay, so let's say our problem is we want to design a better Venmo experience, right? So what we'll be doing in this class is taking an existing app, or maybe designing a new app or a new product from the ground up. So let's take Venmo. That's an app that a lot of people use to make and share payments with friends. So we want to figure out how we can improve Venmo. Well, to do that, we need to first talk to people and look at people and observe people using the app, right? Because we use it in one way, but someone else might use it in a totally different way, to a totally different end. And like we had talked about before, user experience is very tied to user needs. So it's less about what we think is a clever or cool idea, and more about what's really at the core driving this behavior. Why does a person interact with the product the way that they do? And it has a lot to do with that underlying need. which in a lot of cases they don't even realize. And so that's why research is so crucial. So in addition to observation, in addition to watching them use this app, we're also conducting user interviews. And user interviews are great because this really gets at the qualitative elements of the experience. So I'd say, I'm going to put survey up here as well, because survey is sort of the other side of the coin, right? Survey is you want to use surveys for the more quantitative information that you're trying to collect. So how many times do you use Venmo in a day? What's your age? What's your gender? And that's the kind of information that we would want to aggregate and collect over dozens of people to kind of help inform that more demographic type information about our user. Interviews are great because what interviews do is they get at the behavior and the motivations of the user. So if I'm sitting down with a user and I just, I open it up by saying, tell me about your recent experience using Venmo. And it sounds like a pretty boring question, right? Like it sounds like this person's just going to tell me about the last time you used Venmo. But as a designer, that response is just full of information and insights, because what we have then is maybe there was a pain point, right? Maybe the last time they used Venmo, they hated the fact that they felt awkward billing their friend for something that maybe their friend didn't really enjoy. So maybe they went out to dinner and they bought a couple drinks and their friend didn't end up eating or drinking. They felt weird charging them, or whatever it is, something about the context of their use that tells you what, in the current way that they use the app, what bothers them and what makes them uncomfortable. And on the other side of that, what do they love about the app? It may be that it's so easy to use and I can go back in and I can confirm payments without being weird and having to ask my friend directly, like, hey, did you pay me back for that? And Venmo is a great product because it realizes that money is this really kind of awkward, sticky topic. And so they design a product that makes it a social experience and a conversational experience, and kind of takes that awkwardness out of it and that transactional weirdness out of it. And really, at its core, that's great user experience design. So we've done our research, and these are just 3 of the ways. There's many ways that you can conduct research. Contextual inquiry is a great tool, and that is when you're in the field and you're asking someone to complete the task that you are going to be eventually designing for, or just completing a task that is somewhat relevant to the problem at hand. So if I'm trying to figure out a better way to design a airline booking site, I'll have my user during a contextual inquiry go and book an airline flight. So we have all of our research. Now what? If depending on the size of the problem, depending on the constraints of the project, you are going to have a lot of work to sift through. So from the research, and while we're still in the empathize phase, we really are looking at our research for just kind of top-line insights. And insights are kind of a tricky word because a lot of people conflate and confuse insights with observations. So there's a lot of tools to use when we're boiling down our research, and we'll get into more specifics with that when we look at research more specifically. But the main point being is that we want to take all this information and not synthesize a thing until we get to this stage. So maybe you had an interview with someone and you found really interesting. Just make a note of it. Don't really meld or mold that information too much until we get to this place where we're complete with our research. We can look at it in full, and there's tools to do that. Empathy maps, affinity maps, user personas. And that's all going to happen over here in synthesis too. So insights are really the things that in your gut kind of signal to you that there's something sticky here. There's some sort of point of tension that is interesting and I want to investigate it more. So let's say, using our Venmo example, we had, so Venmo has a new feature now, right? It's called Pay with Venmo. And that's a really big deal for Venmo, right? Because that, for them, is the first way that they're going to be monetizing their app. Well, the problem is, in your research, everyone that you spoke with never used that feature. They've never interacted with it. They've never paid with something with Venmo. So that, to you, is an insight. So the easiest way to find insights is where there's almost like a disconnect between information or a contradiction of information. So we have Venmo's priority as pay with Venmo. And it does not equal user need or use. So this is like an interesting insight that we have. So once we take all the research and we kind of similarly mine that research for these insights, and we'll do this again with the project that we're all working on together, you get to a point where you need to kind of start synthesizing these things, right? And the way that we synthesize our insights and our research is with several tools, actually. In any case, you could do something like an empathy map. Empathy maps are great for figuring out a user's motivations, behaviors, context, and kind of like almost mapping, really, their emotions. And so when you're configuring an empathy map, it's a really simple exercise. It's a matter of taking your research, putting it on Post-its and slapping it up on a whiteboard like this, and lumping them into categories based on maybe what the user is hearing. You know, what are their friends saying? What are they hearing in the news? What are they doing? What are their habits? How do they use Venmo on a day-to-day basis? What are they seeing? Are they seeing that a lot of their friends aren't paying them back in the app? Or are they thinking, that Venmo is really easy, but I wish it could do X, Y, Z? So you're getting at all these different facets of what will become ultimately your persona and the target user that you're designing for. Another tool that is sort of used interchangeably with an empathy map, and sometimes at the same time, it might be redundant. So if you get in a situation with clients, they'll probably be a little bit confused if you present them with an empathy map and a storyboard, because they'll kind of be like, well, this sounds like the same information, and that's not totally incorrect. But what a storyboard really does is a storyboard examines a user's experience with what you now have in your mind's eye as a potential solution. And this goes in a more chronological order, and again, it's focusing on the emotions of the user. So it looks really similar to a movie storyboard, like it has scenes, it has thought bubbles, and really what you're doing is you're cataloging the emotional journey of your user as they interact with your product. So you start off with what the pain point is. Maybe it's, so let's say that Venmo is great, but that our user ends up using Venmo a lot of times with the same people for the same thing. So let's say our user has 2 roommates and they're constantly sending bills back and forth to each other on Venmo. And our user gets really stressed out because there's so many different transactions flying back and forth, not to mention the ones that are independent of his roommate costs, that he's kind of frustrated at this stage. He can't find what he's looking for. And then he realizes, he goes into the Venmo app and sees this new feature. Maybe it's this thing called Venmo, where you can make groups, right? So realizes he can make a Venmo group. So now he's curious, and he's looking at this and inspecting this. So he's kind of twiddling around with it. He's still not quite sure what he thinks. And then he realizes, this would be perfect for my roommates. He maybe sees a feature where you can name his group and even name it roommates. And he's really happy about that. And then next time when he goes to check and make sure that he's paid his roommates or his roommates paid him, he can easily go into this new feature and confirm right away and be happy and stress-free. And so Storyboard really helps to show the evolution of the user as they interact with your product. Another thing that is, another tool kind of at this stage is going to be the user journey map, or maybe customer journey map. And this is a really robust document. This is used a lot of times for companies who are creating maybe their marketing plan or trying to figure out user touch points. So user journey map is similar in the storyboard, and really kind of Alexa stop. really combines the best parts of both of these, right? So it has this sort of like undulating, emotions. Alexa, stop. Stop. Sorry. So as we move through the user journey map, we are seeing how the user interacts at key moments in their journey. So maybe here in the journey is when the user makes his first transaction and charges it to Venmo. How's he feeling? He's probably stressed out because, again, he waited too long to charge his roommates. And then he's kind of like going along, and we could go all day with that, and we'll spend more time in that in detail, but just kind of know that these are some tools to kind of synthesize what our research is telling us. Probably most important in the synthesize phase, and what you should be sure you're always using during UX design, is a persona. And a persona is really the totality of all this information. Depending on what synthesis deliverables you're using them to create your persona. And so we'll spend a bit more time talking about the persona, but basically what you need to know is a persona is really your sort of North Star throughout this process, right? It's usually like a one-page document. It has a photo of your user, and it's essentially a composite of all the stuff that you collected during research. So your persona is a made-up person. It's not going to be one of the people that you interviewed. Rather, it's going to be the totality of all these different elements and trends that you found while researching, and then boiling that down and synthesizing it. So it's not going to be a complete map onto any one of the people that you've spoken with, and that's a really important thing to consider, because it's really easy to want to just kind of model it off of one maybe particularly interesting user interview or something like that. And so personas really help at a glance to show us what the user needs are, what their goals are, and then what their frustrations and pain points are, in addition to giving us this sort of background bio and demographic information. And I'll pass out an example of that, and we'll definitely spend more time here because that's really important